So I'd like to start a conversation, but first I need to tell you a story or two. So once upon a time, about 15 years ago, I was invited to attend the Safe and Caring Conference in Edmonton. And as per usual, I procrastinated about choosing which workshop I wanted to go to because there were so many great ones to choose from. So I'm walking down the hall. You know what it's like, you walk down the hall, and as the workshops get full, the doors close and you can't get in anymore. And so I was left with this one door, Linda Kavalin Popoff and the Virtues Project. So I went in and I thought, well, I'll sit at the back. If I don't like it, I could leave. And I spent an hour and a half in tears at the back of the room. And I thought, what is going on? And thought, well, I'm of an age where when that sort of thing happens, you kind of pay attention to it. So I started investigating, and I discovered that in 1988, 3 people sat down at brunch at the Empress Hotel in Victoria. They were Linda Kavalin Popoff, who is a psychotherapist, community healer, hospice worker, social worker. Her husband, Dan Popoff, who is a clinical pediatric psychologist and a scholar, and Linda's brother, John Kavalin, a Walt Disney Imagineer. And they were having a conversation about their concern about violence in the world, particularly when it came to young children, teenage children as well. And so they looked at each other and went, well, somebody should do something about that. And unlike most of us when we have those kinds of conversations, they actually did. So what Dan did is he researched all the world's sacred texts through time. And after 1,600 pages of research, he discovered a very interesting thing, a silver thread of unity of the virtues. All the sacred texts, including Aboriginal wisdom, have these as their character traits that they believe in and that they celebrate and that they honor. So the belief is that our children are born with these in potential. And those of you who are parents will know that our kids kind of come out with certain characteristics already well honed. You'll have a child that's more determined and trusting than another one, or one that's more joyful. And so all of these are in potential in your children. And so, of course, if they're in potential in your children, they're also lying there in all of you. There's a couple of other things you need to know. First of all, you're not going to hear me tell you anything today that you don't already know. Aren't you glad you came? I'm just going to try and raise it up a little bit into your awareness. The second thing you need to know is that I'm not an expert in this at all. I'm a student. I'm simply inviting you along on the journey with me. But I can tell you that it has changed the way I show up in the world, the way I mother, the way I'm a grandmother now, and certainly the way I work with the colleagues that I work with at the hospital and the social work students that it is my privilege to mentor and learn with. So, what do we do with these? Fortunately, Linda came up with 5 strategies to figure out how to implement this in your life. And the first one is that you speak the language. So, a very simple way is that you eliminate the word nice from your vocabulary. Just eliminate it. Try it. It's not that easy. The reason you would do that is that when you think about what nice means, what does nice mean? Doesn't really mean anything, right? Not in conflict ever. When you do that and replace it instead with a virtue, you can meet the spirit of another person and you can acknowledge them. So, for example, I could say to Reed, it was very nice of you to bring TED Talks to Grande Prairie, and that would be considered completely appropriate. However, what I would really want to say is that I want to acknowledge you for your purposefulness and your perseverance in bringing this, and that it was an awesome act of service to bring this to Grande Prairie. Thank you. See, it works. So one of the other things that you can do, and before I do that, I'd like to let you know that this is like learning a new language. So kind of give yourself a break, trust that you'll figure it out. You can use it to acknowledge, and it's really important to acknowledge someone for courage or gentleness. And you can say, I saw your gentleness today when you were playing with your baby brother. I saw your courage when you climbed all the way up to the top of the slide and slid down. What's even more powerful is if you acknowledge a virtue that's emerging, something that they're struggling with. So if you have a child that is quite assertive or gets into fights a lot, you can say, really good peacefulness today. You only got into one fight. And for some, you have to watch your tone when you say that, obviously, but for some children, that's really critical. They need to know what the difference is and what that feels like. The other part to that statement is that you choose not to put I like in front of it, especially with children. What happens if you put I like it when you are gentle or I like it when you are peaceful? Then they start doing it to please you. And we want them just to own it and hold it for themselves, not to do it for you. We don't do enough thanking, for sure, so choose to be aware when there's an opportunity to thank someone for a virtue that you see them practicing. So I have a story about a young man that came to the hospital. He's 35 years old. He came to us about 3 times post-suicide attempt. He jumped out of helicopters to check out seismic sites. So high adrenaline job, well-paying job, and he had left his family behind and was here in Alberta. And he got addicted to crack cocaine. And so over the 4 or 5 months that he came to see us a few times, I got a chance to get to know him. And so before I really knew what I was doing with this work, it was kind of awkward. And so one day I thought, you know, I'm just going to acknowledge the virtues that I've seen in him. And so what I did is I took his name and wrote it down the side of a page and put a virtue beside each letter of his name. And when he came into my office, I gave it to him and I said, so this is how I see you. And he started to cry. He said, nobody's ever told that to me before. So we ended up getting him back to Ontario to his family. That was a decision that he made. And about 4 months later, he emailed me and he said, I have that piece of paper by my computer and I look at it every single day. And about 1.5 years later, he emailed me and he said, could you send me that list of virtues because I'd like to do for my girlfriend what you did for me. And then I always remembered him because you remember certain of your patients. But about 4 years later, I called over to our shelter to make arrangements for one of my patients, and a woman answered the phone that was a brand new staff member, and we had a conversation. Then all of a sudden she said to me, wait a minute, did you say your name was Christine Ayling? And I said, yeah. She said, I'm from Ontario. I just moved here. I have a message for you. She said, I have a friend that said I had to look you up and I had to tell you the Virtues Project saved his life. So even when you think that maybe you're not quite ready or you're feeling awkward about this, when it comes from a really solid place in your heart and you share it, you can make a huge difference in someone's life. The next strategy is teachable moments, and I love this slide because it's a good thing to keep in your head when you're trying to be aware of this work. It's really good when you're dealing with a 2-year-old or a 14-year-old to remember that you're trying to look for the angel underneath whatever they're struggling with. But it's also good for you because teachable moments comes in 2 parts. The first part is that, yes, you have to pay attention. You need to be aware of what people are doing, and you need to have the courage then to take the opportunity to acknowledge them for the virtue that you see. You try it. It makes a huge difference in people's lives. The other part is, it's a tad less comfortable, is when you accept the challenges of life to hone your own virtues, and that's the time when you have to remember that's an angel inside as well that you're trying to polish and work your virtues. So how many of you think you're patient? How many of you are patient in the line at Safeway? Wow, more of you. So you've been practicing. Excellent. It's a very good place to practice patience, but you have to make the choice that that's what you're going to do. So you can choose in that moment to either get all irate and upset and have your blood pressure go up and get really angry, or you can say, okay, this is a teachable moment for me, so I'm going to practice patience. Another story of one of my patients was a gentleman about 45, and he had been to us also several times, very depressed. He was one of our younger Canadian veterans. I had tried to help him. I had tried to... He had not a lot of money, and so I was trying to do his income tax for him, but he wouldn't trust me to do that. And one morning I came to work, and he's standing at my door, looking at, I have the virtues poster that I showed you. I have that on my door at work. And he's standing there, and he's reading them all, and he says to me, you know, I've read all these words, and these are all really good words, but why is detachment there? I've been told that that's a really bad word. And I thought, oh, this is a good teachable moment. So I invited him into my office, and I said, so do you have any idea about why your friends might be saying that you're too detached? And he was kind of at the end of his talking ability. He didn't talk a lot. And I said, well, let me try. Do you think maybe that you had to practice detachment to the degree that you did in order to survive your experiences as a soldier? You practiced it so well, and that's probably why you're still here with us. But I think your friends are trying to encourage you to maybe be a little bit more trusting. Practice your trust a little bit, exercise that muscle, and see, do you think, does that kind of make sense? And he acknowledged that it did, and then he brought me his income tax stuff so I could do his taxes for him. The other lovely thing about that particular story is that over-practiced virtues can be just as dangerous as under-practiced ones. So, for example, the over-practicing the detachment really excluded this man from his family and from his friends. In the same way, acceptance does not mean that you accept the unacceptable, as in family violence, for example. You need to balance acceptance with some discernment and some assertiveness. And by the same token, over-practiced assertiveness grows over into aggression. And so you want someone that's very assertive to also be able to practice compassion and mercy as well in order to balance those out. So that's why I called it dancing, that they dance together. Then we have the third strategy, which is boundaries. And boundaries are critical. We say that they are actually a soul craving. If you think about, if you ever, I don't know, if we bought a property once that didn't have a fence. We're on a corner lot, and we were wondering why our kids didn't go out and play. We put up a fence, and they were out there all the time. Same with the job description. I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience where you apply for a job where the job description isn't clear. It's very, very frustrating. It doesn't allow you to focus at all. One of the most important things about boundaries is personal boundaries. That's what keeps us safe. It allows us to state very clearly where we end and someone else starts. It's really important for our particularly our teenage children, that they feel comfortable in saying no if they need to. Ask for what you want, not for what you don't want. In schools, I always see the sign, no running in the halls. would it not be much better to say, please walk? Or even add to that, please be considerate and walk. Same with our intimate relationships. Far better to say, I just need you to listen to me, than to say, you don't have to fix it. Don't fix stuff. We sometimes think that if we tell people what we don't want, they're going to figure out what we actually want, which is frustrating for a lot of people. The other part of boundaries is using your authority in service to someone else's learning. So if you're in a position of authority, if you're a parent or a mentor or a teacher, you are, just because of the situation, in a position of authority. Choosing to have in the back of your head that when you're in that position, to be in service to someone else's learning will make it easier for you to find this virtues language and use it every day. One of the things that I talk about in my workshops that's really important now is with emails, talking about boundaries. If you cannot, emails, social media, any of that kind of stuff, if you cannot look into the eyes of the human being to whom you're sending the email, you don't send it. Having people understand that is really, really important. And brings us to honoring the spirit, the fourth strategy. Honoring the spirit is about understanding that we are human beings, not human doings. And especially in this part of the world, we certainly get a lot of strokes for being human doings. Taking the time to expose yourself to beauty, to art, to celebrate your friends, to make time for reverence. If you belong to a faith community, you have kind of a built-in time for practicing reverence. If you are not, there are many other places and times and ways to do that. But we need to honor our spirit. We need to have our cup full to overflowing so that it's out of that full cup that we give, or the overflow rather, than out of an empty cup. We have at the hospital often probably 18, 19 to 34-year-old men that come in post-suicide attempt, and we get a lot of them, and they are simply lost. And I often have lengthy conversations with them, and one of the questions that I ask, so you have to imagine this, the questions that I ask is, what brings you joy and what feeds your soul? So most of them look at me like I have 3 heads to start with. But once we talk a little bit longer and I ask them to go back to when they were children, because they can't tell me the answer to that question. They don't know anymore what brings them joy or what feeds their soul. We usually go back to their childhood, and most of the time, the place that feeds their soul and brings them joy lies in the area of the arts. Occasionally, it's sports, but that's pretty rare. And what is the first thing that we cut in school systems? Yeah, it's pretty important. Once we have this conversation, these young men are much more ready to go back out there and add that as a part of balance into their lives. Then we come to the last strategy, companioning. And this is a place where practicing 2 virtues in equal measure is really, really critical. The practice of compassion and detachment. Understanding what detachment means was probably the best and most important thing that the Virtues Project gave to me. As a social worker, you enter the profession with a very well-honed compassion muscle. And if you don't figure out over time how to establish boundaries, how to allow that compassion to be there, but to have enough detachment as well, you tend to get burnt out. And so the way I like to look at this is that you're walking beside somebody. And you offer your presence by having detachment and compassion in equal measure in your body, so that you can offer a sacred space where there is only acceptance and no judgment. But you need to have those two very well balanced. And what your body is like when you bring that energy to the space is a place of peace. And in that space, then, you can ask those, in that sacred space, you can ask with sacred curiosity, what is that like for you? The other thing you don't ask in this is you never ask why. If people knew why, they wouldn't be there, and it brings judgment. If you ask what and how is that for you? What virtue would you need to move forward? You often come to a place of tears as well, and one of the things that I've learned that has been really, really helpful is that you never ask, why are you crying? The difference between why are you crying and what are those tears is monumental. Another way that you offer that safe and sacred space. One final story before I go. At the Global Mentorship in October, I met a woman from Finland who, when the Virtues Project found her, she was addicted to drugs and homeless. She is now the principal of schools in Finland, and she also has some in Beijing. And as the principal, she trains all her teachers with the Virtues Project. And on the rare occasions when a child is having difficulty with an emerging virtue, they get sent to her office. And so what she says to them is, so how is it that today you forgot who you were? So I'd like you to imagine what it would be like if in all our schools, that would be the choice of discipline. How is it that today you forgot who you were? So I invite you to remember who you are. There you are. And despite the fact that it might be a little awkward or uncomfortable, I would invite you to just start with eliminating the word nice, replacing it with a virtue. The life you change will likely also be your own. Thank you.